So to recap, so this is a continuation of the last Kaczynski one, and I think I'll call it something like Kaczynski as against Heidegger. So the two views again are Kaczynski, hard stop, anti-accelerationism, de facto end in the production of let's just say for short, of whatever will come out after what we're currently calling AI, which I never know whether to go into this type of thing or not, because it only concerns some people and not others. But I think to me, I so much take it for granted. I don't know if I should go into it, but then I think, what's the point of having seen something clearly unless I state it? But then on the other hand, it's kind of obvious. But to some people, the current AI, which we use now, like Grok, is not it's not what's in question. That would be sort of like saying Atari 2600 is what we're talking about when we talk about cell phones. It doesn't make any sense. The current AI is more like a super autofill. Like, it just kind of predicts what it thinks people want, and then, in fact, a lot of times it doesn't get it. Just like regular autofill, a lot of times you wish. Actually, for me, like almost every time, I wish that it hadn't done it. It's just that it falsely predicts what I'm trying to write. A few times it gets it right, but I'm so unused to it getting it right. I don't know how to accept the right answer, so that's also more annoying than. I don't know what you're supposed to do with the mouse to make it accept it, and then I have to figure that out. And so that's also more annoying than if it had just not done it. But what I'm saying is the current AI is basically doing something like that, and then the vast majority of people I think actually the interesting thing was when, for a while, Google did an experiment, and it was sort of like classical scholars had told it something in that direction. Classical scholars had said these are the most intelligent answers, and I looked at it and I said, these are intelligent. These are like Jesuit answers. I like this, but then I read about it, and there's this mass pushback on this new Google version of AI, so that they apparently they abandoned that version, and now they have a stupid version, and which people apparently like better. So I think that's an objective proof of the difference between the mentality of people. It's obvious, okay, but it's an objective proof of it. The difference between people that think that something like classical scholarship connected to something like philosophy, so Carl Jaspers, for instance, is the right direction. Then there's people that think something like Trump is the right direction. So I think that's clear, but that's not really what I'm trying to get at here. Is we have AI in the current version as a sort of rinky-dink version is what I'm really trying to say. And it's just not, even though I think there's a tendency of all of us to sort of personalize it, and not just because we're sitting in a car and talking to it as though it were there, like a man speaks to his friend, as it says in Exodus, in connection to Moses talking to Yahweh, face to face, as it were. But there's no face, because there's just the burning bush or the fiery cloud or whatever. This thing answers back. It's very easy to kind of personalize it. It becomes personal. It becomes emotional, and therefore, yes, many people regard even the current AI as having a personality. And certainly, Grok behaves somewhat differently than the Google AI. I haven't really extensively used. I used at least one of the other ones a bit, but not that much. The Chat GPT view. But yeah, they do have different personalities, if you want to put it that way. But so it's easy to treat the current one as like AI, almost as though that were a proper name and a being that we're interacting with. I can see that, but then when you look at how it's working, then you kind of and also I think when you see other people doing that, and then you detect yourself doing it a little bit, then you're like, no, that's not really. You could see it that way, and it's a style of cognition, but it seems stronger to see it in the sense of an autofill. I think what settles that is that it's just like a stuffed animal in a kid. If we take the side of understanding the current AI as sort of being Mr. Grok rather than just Grok, you're in the direction of a Bert and Ernie game, except behind Bert and Ernie isn't a human being playing as the puppet, but rather the stone or whatever, rather the typewriter, as Turing, I think. I'm not sure that Turing actually said the typewriter, but I think that's still accurate to what his view was. It's like the question of whether these things can think is too stupid to ask, because it's like asking if your typewriter is intelligent. The question doesn't make sense. It's too stupid to ask, is what Turing thought. But nonetheless, you can fool people, is what he thought. Yeah, I guess the level we would have to challenge is at the level of the comparison to the kid anthropomorphizing in a fantasy the teddy bear. We would have to say we're doing something like that at the same level, and it's true. And this is, our anthropomorphic lens has failed us. So the new AI is something totally different, and is doing all kinds of different things. That's what I was at, sort of all those pains to try to make into adamantine stone, and to make quartz crystal clear if possible, as something we could just look at as an example of what's happening, and then that there's something totally different is just getting the same name. AI, the new AI, Atari 2600 cell phones. So we have this situation where so let's do it again, the Kaczynski, Heidegger. So then Kaczynski, they claim that the mere change of not doing this anymore is enough. But the problem is we have all these, on the Heidegger side, these questions have already arisen. So like, for instance, if we were in a cannibal society and somewhere on the Amazon River, and I think they actually really exist. I've seen documentaries on them, seen documentaries with them actually poking one another in the ribs, laughing, talking about how they ate one of their neighbors in an earlier year. It's not at all sinister. It seems just like kids. That's an insult. I mean, that's sort of a wrong way to put it. But I mean, there's no malevolence in it. There's no maliciousness in it. It's just like there's an incident. Yeah, it's over. It was kind of unfortunate, and now we can laugh about it. Only they're talking about like eating one of their neighbors a year or two ago to this interviewer. But the point is, if they don't, you see, it's not part of their natural law system. So this is one of the things. Let's try to orient again by this orientation we were using in the last one is. Locke, on the one side, is having these conversations that are not so much had today, except they are to some extent in the background, like the Fox religions in China, where he's making appeals to God, he's making appeals to the Bible, he's making appeals to all kinds of things which link into the whole Western tradition, and which amongst other things, he says, the natural law, one thing, it has to be properly promulgated. And then here's this funny example of the naturally promulgated. Locke doesn't say this exactly, but it fits in exactly. What about, maybe he even does, I'm not sure, but what about primitive peoples? What about, how could they be expected to be informed about this? But here's the deep cut, is that the debate about these remote tribes. So if you were to go in and ask them, they don't do it, but if you were to start to try to probe and try to make some kind of engagement with them, you would start to be playing your record so they could hear it, your tunes, and then it would be like they would say, oh, so we can question whether cannibalism is good, just like in the Antigone you have sort of a display that questions whether certain kings can misuse their power or something, and then it's shown to everybody gets conscious of this type of questions. But these tribes aren't conscious of those kind of questions. So merely even broaching the question changes what kind of beings they are. So taken that way, the change in what kind of beings we are that have come through the technological essence wouldn't go away just because we followed the Kaczynski's recipe, just because we de facto change things. The change that had happened in our basic stirrings of our being wouldn't change because of de facto changes. So that's what I think is much more on the side of Heidegger, because Kaczynski's solution just wouldn't work in that sense. The cannibals are somehow a different kind of being than the ones who had deliberately seen. I mean, I suppose you could say it happened this way. Groups came again and again in contact with their neighbors. Some of them, which had unusual traits that the neighbors didn't share, were declared to be inhumane, and then they were, like for instance, if the Carthaginians were said to do human sacrifice, and then over many generations, the Romans who knew about that, child human sacrifice, the Romans who knew about that exterminated them. There's something to that. And this is a notion of natural law, and therefore natural law and some kind of basic strategical considerations come together. This whole questioning is on one side, and then the engagement of the technological essence is on another side, where instead of the belief in the God that secures that there's a difference between good and evil, or that there's a difference between vice and virtue, and therefore at the same time law, therefore at the same time that it makes sense to say nothing that's not reasonable is lawful, appealing to this ultimate God of nous, of reason, of ratiocination, and so on and so on. If this discussion becomes instead the God of general laws of physical potentialities, merely the consciousst of this shake-up, that's the point. Merely the consciousness of this iconoclast, this reevaluation of all values. This has created a different thing that doesn't go away just because you would reset the material conditions. So there is a Geist in that sense, if you want to put it in Hegelian terms. I mean, that's one. It's sort of it's a somewhat convenient way to present it, although I feel ashamed in having done that because our guilt, because I'd rather to put a preference on the Heidegger's way of doing it and not in Hegel's. But that was just a point of orientation. Somehow, that's one way of talking about it. I mean, you could say the culture changes. Benedict Anderson, the woman that wrote that book meant to explain the Japanese to the U.S. military, the chrysanthemum and the sword, said that culture is personality writ large. So you could say the personality changed. We're dealing with personality changes in these cases. So the Kaczynski version doesn't address that, not really. This is already known to Marx, by the way. This notion that the caveman, the caveman and the caveman personality go together. But if you have radical personality shift to Renaissance Italy personality, and then you put the Renaissance Italy man in the cave, it's degrading to him because his personality has changed. So we can't just step back into the old ways pretending our personality hasn't changed. We'd have to address that as well. So these are, I think, major considerations on this side of Heidegger, and it's quite a few of these considerations aren't special to Heidegger. I mean, Carl Jung said Heidegger is banal as hell. A lot of things Heidegger's talking about are things that are part of the way the Prussian and the German, more widely the German-speaking universities understood the questions that had come down to them from antiquity and the way they did discourse, and simply a form that was very widely held in those universities and amongst those peoples, but which was not the form and across that narrow channel to England.